There's quite a history behind our next guest, but let's just start by saying he is the guy. In fact, I love the what it says on the on the book. What every Canadian taxpayer needs to know and fear. Well, the man who, when something bad happens in the world of tax, for years, Canadians have called this gentleman. Please welcome Paul DioGuardi, everybody. Paul, thank you. Why is it that, if I ever get anything from something in the mail and it's like from the Canadian, it's from Revenue Canada?
Because of the beige envelope.
The beige envelope.
There you go. And we all get a bit of a shudder, no matter whether we think we've done anything wrong or not. When we get that envelope, you say, what the hell's in there now? What are these devils up to? And, what I've done throughout my life is, at this time of the year, you hear about the tax accounts. You got to file your taxes. Well, maybe you shouldn't be filing your taxes. Maybe you're in a situation where you haven't filed for years, and if you go and file in a batch, suddenly you're going to be audited. So maybe what you want to do is sit down with a person like myself and say, look, I haven't filed for the last 8 years. They're not on to me yet. My accountant's telling me to go ahead and file. And everything will be okay. And normally what I say to the person is, maybe you should be thinking about getting a tax amnesty before you go ahead, because if they're not after you already, you can get away with all the penalties and, of course, the interest on the penalties. And this may be the best way. Let us look into this. Let us consider it. And often we do a tax amnesty, and then you're filed up to date, and you have no penalties, and there can be huge savings.
Okay, I want to explore some of the things you've said, but let's just go back a little bit. What did you want to say?
No, I was going to say, how does that happen in this computer age?
Right.
How is the fact that I haven't filed my taxes not flagged immediately just by a computer somewhere? I find that fascinating that it could happen.
It's amazing. I have people coming in all the time, and they say they're not on to me yet.
Crazy.
And I say, well, have you received a letter? Have you received a phone call? Has your wife, your companion received a phone call? Are they collections after you? No, they don't know about me. I say, well, okay, we're in a perfect situation. Let's think of fixing it.
I want to interrupt a little bit, because I was actually going to ask a similar question to Fred, but how are they not onto? I mean, every other thing I do, I get a notice right away. How have they not? Maybe back in the olden days, but as soon as isn't there a grand computer there in Ottawa that shows whether I filed or not?
There probably is, but they're not. But we have many people who come in and they haven't been contacted.
Okay. So that would be my next question, and I think it fits here. I hear all the time, and I hear it on commercials sometimes, CRA has hired thousands of more auditors or investigators. However, recently I was talking to somebody that used to work for the CRA, and she says there's a lot of complaints within the institution that they're understaffed, they're overwhelmed. What's the word? Do you know?
Well, I was trained at head office of Canada Revenue Agency as a young lawyer, so I know they're usually very good, but I mean they can only do what they can do, and they are understaffed. I believe that to be the case. Not that I want them. I don't want them to be overstaffed.
No,
I'm on the other side.
Here.
But the thing is, I'm just saying there are opportunities for people if they look into a situation. For example, the accountant always says, "Oh, yeah, file up to date. Yeah, well, that's sometimes good if they're after you. Then if they're after you and you file up to date, then you have to look at the other side of the fence and say, okay, how can we get the penalties and the interest reduced? And that's under a Section 220 application. It's not too complicated. It's not too expensive. And it can bring large benefits because the interest rates that the Canada Revenue Agency charges, it sounds low, but it's compounded daily. So it's equivalent to credit card interest rates. So which is, you can end up owing them a lot of money.
One of the questions I thought Fred was going to ask, and it's sort of on the heels of that, the idea of being flagged. What about the idea that who doesn't file their taxes for 8 years? And we know, Freddie and I know some people that I know haven't. It just seems odd to us. What are some of the things when somebody walks into your office and they go, sorry, Paul, I'm in trouble? I mean, what's the longest you've ever seen where somebody hasn't filed?
25, 30 years?
Come on.
No, I'm serious. 25, 30 years. But there's also people, there's the other side of the fence, and that is people who are T4'd who haven't filed for 7, 8 years, and they haven't been bothered. So even if you're T4'd and all your taxes are paid, there's still penalties for failure to file. So you may want to do a tax amnesty anyway, because there's always something you haven't reported. There could be bank interest or something like that, and you want to put all that in, and then you get a pass. You can do one tax amnesty in your lifetime, so you want to make sure it's
worth
really
it.
needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got to be worth it, but you don't want to do too many of these anyway. But they're not. It's a very good way of solving a problem.
Do you think a lot of people too, sometimes they do their taxes, they file it, they even go to an H&R Block or something, and it's you owe $6,000. I don't have $6,000. I don't want to borrow $6,000. I can't. I'm in trouble. I don't have this money, so I just won't file.
Well, there's that too, but there's also a lot of people on the other side of the fence who have filed and owe a huge amount of tax, and because the Canada Revenue Agency isn't bothering them, they think they got away with it. And as I say, you're looking at about 18% interest when you look at the daily compounding, and they come back years later and they come in and see me, Paul, I owe $150,000. How did that happen? Well, at credit card interest rates. Then we've got to figure out how do we get them out of it, because that's the other
key
difficulty. Yeah. How do you get the person out without losing everything?
So is that, at that point, they're sitting in your office and they go, Paul, I owe $150,000. Do you have any cash you might want to loan me? Okay, that goofy aside, but let me ask you this. If when you hear about being audited, I've never had it, happen to myself or any of the businesses that I've been involved in, but if I get a notice from them that I'm going to be audited for some reason, most people will call their accountants. But your premise, and I think it's a good one, is you got to call DioGuardi.
Well, what we often do is bring the books and records into our office. We have the auditor in our office doing the review. We have former CRA people working for us as well. I used to work, as I say, at head office, and as they retire, I hire them. So I get the best. And when we have a CRA auditor in, well, we have a former CRA auditor there. The first thing you got to do is try to restrict them to the years under review, because otherwise they'll start going, oh, let's go back a few more years.
How long are they allowed? What are they allowed to do? Just the years that they're disputing?
Well, if they find misrepresentation or fraud, they can go back any number of years.
Really?
Usually they'll look at, and they can make up misrepresentation, but usually they'll look at the years under review, and that's part of the exercise. We want to keep them within those years and try to keep it as quick and as efficient as possible, because they can make something out of nothing.
Well, what you just said seems to me to make the most sense. If I'm in trouble, let's say CRA wise, I get you to help because you're not only you've got a bunch of former CRA people, but the people that come in see that, I would think, and there's a comfort. I would think there's a comfort around knowing that the guys that they're dealing with are also CRA styles.
Yeah. Okay, but there's also something else. You see, if you have your accountant handle it, and look, I worked with accountants at Head Office of Revenue Canada. I love accountants dearly, but the thing is, if your accountant's handling it, he or she might fear that the CRA might start looking at their other clients.
Right.
And they could use...
No one needs that.
Yeah, they don't want that. So sometimes they're not as aggressive as they should be. Now, you're aggressive in a polite way with the CRA, but sometimes they won't go the extra mile, and we do.
Let's get a handle on this. So somebody comes in and says $150,000, and that's accrued tax or interest. Say the real tax bill is $75,000. It's built through interest to $150,000. What's a realistic negotiation or amnesty result?
Well, in that case, it's not an amnesty. What it is there's a Section 220 application for penalty and interest relief. Now, let's say that you haven't been able to pay because you have illness in the family. You're nursing a sick mother, your wife or your companion has been ill, you have financial problems, you've lost your job, you can't pay. Well, we do an application for penalty and interest relief, and on the basis that they have a discretion to give that. So if there's a reason that you haven't been able to pay, and we do it in such a way, we were talking about the accountants, they just say, oh, send in a letter, but the letter, 90% of them are refused. What you've got to do is do it as a legal brief with the cases and everything, so they know that if it's refused, you could appeal their decision to the federal court. And we get a better result because of that. We do it properly.
That voice you're hearing is Paul DioGuardi. You hear a lot about his company, lots of commercials. But I don't think did you completely explain what an amnesty is? You said you're only allowed one in your lifetime, and you said you want to be careful. You don't want to use it.
Does that mean free and clear, or again reduced?
No, you still have to pay the tax.
Right.
Okay, so they're not going to give you a reward of not paying the tax.
Right.
But the thing is, okay, let me take you back 50 years. When I was, I've been practicing for 50 years. When I was a young lawyer at head office of what was called the Department of National Revenue, then I worked with special investigations. They don't call them that anymore, but they're the tax police. And I used to have coffee with the guys and say, and one day I said, what would happen if somebody came in and you didn't know that he'd been evading taxes and he made a confession to you? Surely you wouldn't prosecute him, and surely you wouldn't penalize him. And they said, well, Paul, yeah, we have something called a voluntary disclosure. Nobody knows about it. I said, what do you mean nobody knows about it? He said, well, we don't publish it, but I mean, we have this policy. And of course, what we're going to do, they'll just pay the tax and they'll pay the interest on the tax, and we'll even reduce the interest on the tax. So I said, I put that in my little kit bag. And when I left the tax department to go into private practice, I started using voluntary disclosures. In 2004, I wrote a book entitled Tax Amnesty, Avoiding the Tax Trap. And I talked about the voluntary disclosure process. I had calls from all over Canada. I had a chartered accountant who flew in from Quebec City. He said, what the hell is that? I said, well, what is it?
He'd never heard of it before.
He never heard of it. I mean, and I heard of it because, look, I mean, I didn't pick it out of the air. I heard of it through a conversation. So it's not an amnesty, as Fred said. You don't get forgiven from owing them anything. You just get forgiven them from what? The interest, penalties, and the interest on the penalty. Plus, they give you a reduction on the interest on the tax usually. So they're not going to reward you.
And you're only allowed one of those.
You're allowed one.
And there's a big difference between evasion and failure to file, right? Because failure to file can be, hey, I'm an honest guy, but I just didn't file, or there's nothing wrong with what I would.
Well, an amnesty will fix evasion, too. They won't prosecute you criminally as well.
Right.
So that's fixed, too.
How about this? I'm being audited. The guy who walks into this room likes me, or he takes an immediate dislike to me. Can that influence his decision? Just based on human nature?
We're human beings.
Yes, we are. But what kind of discretion? I think that's what you're asking. What's the discretionary nature of the business where if he does take a shine to us and says, you know what, you guys, let me just give you a little bit of let me tell you about a couple things you may not have thought about.
Well,
or is that wishful thinking?
It doesn't happen too often.
Okay.
But actually, often the opposite, that we get people, especially tax collectors, we've had to go to the director and have some tax collectors taken off the files.
Because they're just acting inappropriately.
Oh, well, we had some that are really like
ruthless.
One of them I'm going to have to go to one of the assistant commissioners in Ottawa because this person is she shouldn't be dealing with the public.
So we've talked a little bit about people that don't file, which we think is interesting and odd. And what about people that are knowing or unknowing? We'll start with knowingly not declaring everything. And they come back a couple years later. They find that you had some income that wasn't declared, or and then now that changes the tax you were supposed to pay in that year. Are you penalized at that point for the taxes that should have been? It's not just, hey, by the way, you owe us $2,000 from 2012. You owe us $2,000 plus 4 years of penalties?
Well, it depends on how large the negligence is. If there's gross negligence, they can charge you a gross negligence penalty. Plus, they could also prosecute you. So let's say you had a side business going and you had $50,000 that you didn't declare.
Yeah.
And the auditor says, oh, well, this guy is really playing games, and you know what? We've had trouble with him in the past. I think we'll make an example out of him, because one of the things they want to do, and I handle tax evasion cases. I defend tax evasion cases, too. And one of the things that they want to do is put the fear of the Lord in everybody. So occasionally they'll prosecute somebody. And sometimes they're wrong, even when they prosecute. I had one case in London where it was terrible. We had to do an audit of their audit, and we found out about 95% of their audit was wrong. But they prosecuted the guy, and they wouldn't even talk to us. So I said, okay, we'll go to court. We got the guy off.
Paul, what if, you often hear people say, we saw it through the Ghomeshi case. How can she defend him when it's obvious he's guilty? How do you attack that? If somebody says, "Oh, how can you defend a tax evader?" Because it's costing us all money.
Well, no, because everybody has to have somebody to defend them.
Right.
You can't just throw people to the wolves. So, and often there is a defense. Like I've given you the London, Ontario case. They were 95% wrong, and they were so arrogant. I spoke to them, and look, I was trained by special investigations. I know what they're supposed to do. And I said, listen, you've done your investigation wrong. They said, oh, no, we haven't. I said, well, you should have done this. You should have done that. I've done it. Oh, no, we're going to prosecute anyway. So we ended up in criminal court. We got them off.
Well, good for you.
What every Canadian taxpayer needs to know and fear, the Taxman is watching. That's one of yours. Never smile at a crocodile. Paul DioGuardi. That's Confessions of a Tax Traveler. Sometimes when you hear the DioGuardi commercials, and Philip's your son, right?
Yes, he is.
So I hear these commercials, and when I first started hearing about DioGuardi, I think a lot of us were like, I'm not sure what that is, and I think they became very clear that, there are times when you need a tax lawyer. And then all of a sudden, you know where I'm going with this? There was these other commercials where a tax accountant started to reference you guys. You know the one I mean. He basically made it sound like, well, tax lawyers are, this, and then tax accountants are that. But in actual fact, if you ever, the first thing you're going to want if you get a notice from the CRA in your books is you got to go get a lawyer. Are there cases where you would look at it and go, you know what, this isn't really that serious? You could probably just get your accountant to send a letter.
We, in fact, when we review a case, if we feel that a lawyer is not needed,
yes,
we have another service, which is a non-lawyer service. It's called DioGuardi. It's handled by former Canada Revenue agents.
It's called
DioGuardi.
DioGuardi. I like that.
And it's handled by former CRA auditors, people who I've handpicked. It's segregated from the law firm. See, what I do is this. When I sit down with somebody, this is why I enjoy practicing tax law. I sit down and say, okay, if I'm that person, what would I do for myself? And how do I fix it the cheapest way? So the first thing I say is, okay, in my mind, do you need a lawyer? It may be a situation where you don't need a lawyer, in which case I would say, look, I'll refer you over to DioGuardi. They may be able to help you at a lower cost. And if so, God love you. Do it that way.
Sure.
Or if it's a strictly accounting problem, I'll refer you over to an accounting firm.
And that's kind of what I was getting at, and which I think is a nice feature of what happens at DioGuardi is that you're not every case is going to be, we need to lawyer up here.
No.
Some stuff is going to be a simple, you might want to do this, and then we're going to be fine.
Well, sometimes it's too expensive. Like I sat down actually the other day, and we'll pull in all kinds of people to look at the problem. Had a gentleman come in. Instinctively, I knew it wasn't a legal problem. So what we did is we sat down with 5 other people. We went through, and because he didn't speak English very well, he owed $250,000.
Wow.
And we figured, how are we going to get him out? We even had a trustee in there, because what we do is what no other law firm does. We actually pay trustees to come in off the record discussions before we do anything. And in this case, it may be a proposal. You see, so I'm trying to find what is the best way to help people. What I would do for myself. So
which is a nice quality.
What I just say, and you can see the people relaxing. They come in, they're all stressed. And my daughter Anne, who used to work for me in the Vancouver office, because I'm a member of the BC Bar as well, she said, what do you tell people when they come in? I said, they look so stressed, and when they come out, they look relaxed. What the hell do you say to them? I said, well, I try to solve their problem, and this is what they're here for. They want somebody to help them. And I don't want to send anybody away without helping them. And if it's not legal, maybe it's an accounting problem. Maybe I send them to the accountants and they fix it that way. Maybe I send it to the non-lawyers, the DioGuardi.
But the fact is, your reason to be is to make their experience a positive one.
And part of the stress and the fear is the unknown, right? And then once you can explain a few things, it's like, whew, well, I get it. Yeah.
And then the decision is up to them. Look, do you want to do it this way? And then you go on a cost basis. You say, okay, if you want to use DioGuardi, if you want to use the accountants, they'll quote you. It's not me. The lawyer's out of it.
What's your opinion on this? I know it would probably be bad for business, but if Canada instituted a flat tax, do you think with a lot of this stuff could be alleviated?
Maybe. I think there'll always be problems when you have a tax collector, because we have a natural instinct against tax collecting. Just go back to Robin Hood. I mean, even as far back as that.
Yeah.
What do you say? There's a big story in the news about all these companies around the world, these parking their money offshore, billions of dollars of uncollected taxes, leading to this question, which is, a lot of people think that very wealthy people pay a lot less taxes than they should because they have access to ways to shelter their tax money.
That's true. And I'm also a member of the Turks and Caicos Islands Bar, so I've kicked around the tax havens, the Cayman Islands, the Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. Like, I've been around, and there are people there who, yes, they set up often legitimate ways of avoiding taxes. But the whole problem of the Panama Papers is it's going to come back to bite us. It's a cruel joke on the Canadian taxpayer because they've hired more tax auditors. And what they're going to do is turn them on the ordinary guys like you and me, and they're going to come after us more. So because they can't get at them too easily. They're very difficult to get at because they've got legions of lawyers and accountants, and they'll fight to the end. Whereas they can pick off the little guy a lot easier. So those 100 new auditors that the CRA has hired, ironically, are going to be turned against the Canadian public. So it's a cruel joke on us.
Yikes.
Well, I wanted to ask, too, like, if for very wealthy, forget that the Panama level of billions that they're hiding, do you think sometimes, richer Canadians are sometimes unfairly targeted? Like a CRA might look at a file and go, well, this guy made $1 million and he only paid, $110,000 in income. I'm going to look at that. There's got to be something, and it might be legitimate. It might be a business or something. Or do you have a lot of those cases where it looks like they're being targeted?
Sometimes, not as often as you might think, though. Often what happens is there's been a misfiling, or there's been there's also people who call in. They have a snitch line. Okay, so you can call in anonymously and say, do you know about Mr. Smith? He has an offshore bank account, and they pay you now for snitching. Well, the IRS has done this for years.
Yeah. And
the Canadian Revenue Agency is taking lessons from the IRS. They're going to get nastier and nastier as time goes along.
Well, I could see that too, because even in Canada with our smaller population, when you think all the people that file taxes or pay income taxes, hundreds, millions of people, how your number comes up has always fascinated me. So I guess it's through snitch lines or whatever computer system they have that every so often somebody gets flagged. Who those auditors are working on, how did they decide on those people?
And before you continue, let's just mention that Paul DioGuardi is here, and we only have a couple more minutes live on Sirius. And before we leave, I want to make sure everyone knows where across Canada you can be protected. You can be DioGuardied if you want. What was the
DioGuardi.ca.
I like that. In our last couple minutes. So you go from the CRA, you open up your own office, you got your kid, Philip involved, and you've got offices everywhere. Now you're expanding in Southern Ontario. So right now the offices are Toronto. Where else?
Mississauga, Ottawa.
Yep.
And we're going to be in Woodstock.
And now local, there's DioGuardi announces expansion, a purchase of a standalone office position to offer local in-person service to Hamilton, Kitchener, and London.
That's right.
Where people are listening right now.
That's right. That's going to be opening in the summer.
And it's funny when you meet somebody like you. We've met a lot of entrepreneurs, whether it's the guy that started the Four Seasons or our friend who's our friend Saul Corman. It's funny as when you meet men and women who are interested in what they do and are fascinated by life, like you are. As you get older, you still are engaged. It's like a lot of times people are in careers that they don't like. And Fred and I talk about this all the time. We love doing this, so we can't imagine not doing it. Whereas you get to a certain age,
I'm exactly the same way.
A lot of guys just go, I didn't like what I did, so I'm going to retire. But I can see that you're engaged. And because you're still fascinated by this, you're not going, I want to go to.
Well, it's the ability to help people. Because as I say, look, if somebody comes in with a real problem, it's a challenge.
Sure.
So if I can't figure it out, we'll get a team together. We'll figure it out, and we'll find out, as I say, the best way and the cheapest way of fixing it.
But you're still fascinated by the process.
I love it.
Yeah, I can see that.
So when the Canada tax laws are revised or changed, do you just run to work and dive into the changes and get to know them inside out?
No, not really, because you see, this is the distinction. The technicalities are not that important. We can do that behind. I can have people following behind. The real problem is to make sure that they come out better than when they come in the door. So if you walk in the door and you got a problem, I got to find a way to fix that problem. Somehow I got to get you so that your problem is gone. If I need technical review, I have an army of people behind me. They'll look into the Tax Act, and then I'll look at it and say, okay, does it make practical sense? Does it make financial sense for the person to do this? Then we talk to the client and say, look, do you want to do that? Maybe, for example, the client has a huge debt that he can't pay, and we have to put him through a proposal. We'll go through a proposal with a trustee. Maybe he has to go through a bankruptcy. We'll be there with him because the trustee acts for both the creditor, the Canada Revenue Agency, and the debtor. So you need a lawyer there to help you and to get you a discharge, you see. So the bottom line is solving the problem.
And, it's interesting, ever since you started running commercials and I became aware of who you are in the company, it's a kind of service where, in a way, you kind of hope you never need, but it's nice to know if you need it, it's going to be there, that you won't be alone. Because a lot of people think, man, if I ever get audited or something happens or I make a mistake or mistakes are made on my behalf, which I'm sure happens to a lot of people, it can ruin a person. And I'm sure you've seen that too.
A lot of people come in and you'd be surprised and say, my bookkeeper or my accountant, I thought she was filing the HST for years. She didn't file it. I now owe $150,000 and my business is in danger. What do I do? Well, in that case, we look at the liability. We'll look at a way to try to reduce it. We look at maybe even a restructuring of the business in such a way, maybe forward estate planning that the new generation takes over.
Sure.
We look at everything, and then we say to the person, okay, here's a plan, because we also do financial planning. We have certified financial planners working with us.
Amazing.
So I have accountants. I have certified financial planners. It's like a supermarket for solving. No, but we're trying.
Do you need a couple radio guys there?
Well, maybe we do.
We have a problem, Paul. Oh, this will be a humble and Fred issue.
That blows me away because I handle when the money comes into our business here.
Yeah.
And, every month you get an HST account balance. And it just blows me away that somebody could go like months and months and years without knowing that they had.
Well, if you depend on your, let's say you're in construction. Let's say you're in construction and you depend on your bookkeeper.
Yeah.
And your bookkeeper tells you, you say, are the HST filings up to date? Oh, yeah, they're all up to date. And then your bookkeeper leaves. And a new accountant or bookkeeper comes in and says, well, you didn't file right, or you didn't file at all.
All right.
She lied to you, or maybe she's pocketing some money.
Jeez.
You'd be surprised how happened. And even accountants
I'm sure.
making big mistakes.
Well, again, if it's the kind of thing where, now it's a couple weeks away from filing, and maybe, I know there's some people listening that when they hear us talk about people that haven't filed, it makes them make a physical reaction because they know they haven't filed. Listen, if you have problems, this is the place to go. DioGuardi, it's DioGuardi, and the website?
DioGuardi.ca.
Did you have a nice time here?
Had a lot of fun.
Not only are you a fascinating human being, and I can see you're interested in what you're doing, but you dress nicely.
Thank you.
I just looked over about halfway through the interview, and I noticed that you're wearing some kind of cool collarless suit-looking thing.
Oh, it's from Austria.
Is that where it's from?
Yeah, from Austria.
Well, of course. Yeah. Mine, I got my stuff at the dollar store, Austrian dollar store.
Well, actually, what I do is I go to the tax conferences, and then it's a deductible. It's a deductible trip.
Talking about.
So I go there and I learn.
Yes,
I meet people,
and you wear.
And then when I see if they have something nice, well, this is not deductible. This is a suit jacket,
but you could be deductible. Yeah. You need it for presentations.
That's Colonel Saunders. He tried that and it didn't work.
Did he?
Yeah, it didn't work.
Is that a story?
That's the story.
What is the story?
Yeah,
the story is Colonel Saunders tried to deduct his white suits when he was alive, and he went to court and they refused to allow him. They said, no, that's just, he said, it's a trademark. It's, I wear my white suits just like my little mustache and my beard. They said, no, they didn't allow it.
So when Fred and I try and write off our clothes as, no, we should.
And I can't either, so join the club.
All right.
That's one thing we don't write off because we don't buy them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we've got some. We might want to talk. We might. That's right. Yeah. They're hand-me-downs from our older brothers. Yeah. Well, listen, it was great meeting you.
Same here.
And I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
I have.
We'll let everyone know that, listen, do what you need to do, but if something goes awry, this is the guy to call. And some fascinating reading. Never smile at a crocodile. And the Taxman is watching. And this is the longest we've ever talked about taxes and issues and problems without getting all queasy.
Well, because we're talking about life. This is part of life. Whether you like it or not, it's part of life.
No, it is. And this is a stressful time of year, but I think you probably made a lot of people feel better today, too, listening to this.
I guess I did.
I have one more quick question before we let you go. Because you've thrown around the figure of 150,000 as an example a couple times in the time you've been here. If somebody walks in and they've got a problem, let's say a lower number, their issue is they're offside to $20,000 or $30,000. Still a lot of money for a lot of people. But the cost of helping solve that problem might be more than, or should I say, is it ever more than the taxes owed?
We look at that, and that's why we have DioGuardi.me. But if it's not, then what I'll do is say, okay, maybe you can fix this yourself this way. Now, sometimes, let's say somebody, even if they need an appeal to the tax court, we'll draft the appeal for them and say, okay, here's how you do it. You go yourself because it's too expensive. In fact, I'm just doing that for somebody now. I said, here's how you're going to do it. Now, this gentleman is trained as a lawyer, but he doesn't practice. So I said, look, you're a lawyer. Here, I'm going to draft this for you as of an old friend. You're a lawyer. I'm going to draft this for you to the appeal to the tax court. Here's how you're going to go. You're going to go and represent yourself, and you're going to negotiate, and here's what you're going to do, because it's not worth you to hire me.
Fair enough.
I do that often.
But you don't recommend, that person's a special case because they've got some background in the law. If somebody comes to you and you sort of go, well, listen, guys, this is going to cost you more for me to do this, you don't recommend that the average, schmo goes up there by himself.
I don't normally recommend it, but sometimes if they're adamant and they want to, even if they're not a lawyer, if they want to go to tax court, I say, okay, well, your alternative is this, but you got to understand, you got to go there, and here's how you plead the case. Here's what you tell the judge. The onus of proof is on you, because if you don't prove the tax department is wrong, you lose. If you want to do it that way, we'll draft the pleading for you, because it's not worthwhile for you to have a lawyer. And they love it, because they get their day in court. That's what most people want. They want to be able, win or lose, they get their day in court.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to do this, people listening around North America. We're just going to we have about a minute left before we leave live. On our podcast extra today, we've got a bunch of stuff as well. Can you just sit here for 30 more seconds?
Sure, I'm glad to stay here.
All right. You go back to the office and go, hey, guys, that was great. Howard and Fred are my new buddies. Really enjoyed it, that type of thing. Or maybe not. Maybe you won't be saying that.
You're pretty good guys, actually.
Yeah, we're great guys.
I like you.
Paul.
You're good. And I think we're having a lot of fun.
I think we had a great time.
Yeah.